Okay, excellent. Well, hello and welcome to another chat series of Good Design is Good Business. Our site on DeveloperWorks, the link is mentioned there. My name is Roger Snook, the Worldwide Enablement Leader at IBM Rational. I'm on the Offering Strategy and Delivery team. You can reach me at any one of the links shown there above, either on Twitter or LinkedIn. Our topic today is an Innovate 2012 preview, which features RSA Sketching. I cleverly titled it Model Behavior, but our speaker today, Aaron Rusty Lloyd from WellPoint, who I'll introduce a little bit more a little bit later. But I will tell you that today's session is being recorded, and if you don't like that, please hang up now. We will open up the lines later for Q&A. If you have a question in the meantime, please use the chat window on the right-hand side of your browser window. You'll see the little blue cartoon bubble there where you can enter in questions as we go along. And then, like I said, we'll open up the lines a little bit later. And all lines have been muted. So once we do open up the lines, we will go ahead and allow for questions and interaction then. So today's topic, as I mentioned, is RSA Sketching in Collaboration, or what I'll quote as Model Behavior. Our quick agenda today is why are we here? We're going to talk about the business of software in general. We'll introduce RSA Sketching, and then we'll turn it over to Rusty to talk about how he applies that in WellPoint today. So brief kind of why are we here today? You know, we're all striving for improved productivity, doing more with less, and blueprints or models or diagrams and modeling are all great behaviors to have within companies and can save us so a bunch of time with respect to our efforts. So here are some examples of a large government agency that use modeling to increase their productivity. A vendor of SOA-based enterprise resource planning applications had a 50% reduction in development time. Major media company, 30 to 50% time savings for architects translating into a bunch of additional development savings. So bottom line, RSA saves development time. That is, Rational Software Architect saves development time and time spent on documentation, enhances the understanding of the system being built, and generally makes it easier to communicate downstream in our application efforts. Blueprinting in general, and this was actually an excerpt from a topic I did with the RSA product manager last year on blueprinting for success, but it is a standardized approach for engineering construction realms, and we're taking that same approach with software here today in today's discussion. And it helps us reduce complexity, risk, and cost, and gets us to get agreement on a lot of the solutions we're building, just like a blueprint would if you're building a house. Blueprinting reduces the complexity in a lot of different ways. Traditional modeling and modeling approaches that you see in the upper right of this chart are often the drivers that are driving software blueprinting and modeling, that is being able to use industry standards and standard frameworks and easily do impact analysis or simulate models for early problem determination and detection with your interconnected components of your model. But we're going to focus today on not the traditional UML modeling per se, but something we call sketching or informal modeling, where many of us probably are doing this today on a whiteboard or a piece of paper, and we're quickly capturing our ideas to analyze that and move that problem set a little bit forward in terms of common understanding of the solution. And so let me introduce now the concept of agile sketching, or the sketching capabilities of Rational Software Architect. This is new in the version 8 series of the product. If you're not familiar with that, this is a great way to quickly capture your thoughts using a very reduced instruction set of components that you see here in the middle of the palette, and be able to capture those thoughts quickly and then start to communicate. What's really wonderful about this type of approach is it's actually applicable through several different layers of our software development lifecycle, and particularly you'll see that in this rough chart here. And it's also highly applicable in the Agile world, where there's actually a great article here on the truth about Agile modeling on DeveloperWorks. Carrying forward a little bit more, what's even nicer going beyond that is the ability to leverage that productivity that we talked about earlier and using models to do things for us so that we don't have to do them manually. The classic approach is what we might know as is taking UML and generating that code. So that there alone has been known to save 15-20% productivity for many customers that have done their designs but now need to build the code that represents that design. Today, when we talk about the Agile sketching or these informal models, we can actually use that as a bridge to transform that into our UML models. Now, historically, when we look at these various approaches, it's generally rekeying information from perhaps a Visio or from a whiteboard into the next stage model and so on, and then entering in the code by hand. All those are things that we can dispense with by leveraging some of the capabilities for automation in Rational Software Architect. One example of that shown on the next slide is the ability to take that quickly sketched out diagram and transform those elements into their appropriate counterparts. So the little stick man then would then become an actor, and components like this element might become a deployment node or a database in our ultimate diagram. And so then again, that transformation that RSA provides gives us the ability to leverage some of that productivity savings that we have in the tool. So with that, let me go ahead and, with that brief introduction of sketching, let me go ahead and switch this over to Rusty and allow Rusty to tell you about how he's applied this in the context of WellPoint. Rusty?
Thanks, Roger. Sorry about that. I was on mute for a second listening. Welcome, everybody. My name is Rusty Lloyd. I work at WellPoint in the Technology Strategy and Enablement Group. And one of the things I've been responsible for is communities of practice. And so when Roger says work at think speed, I tend to look at it as work at people speed. And so one of the problems that I had is as the thing that was communities of practice grew and brought in different technologies, there were certain patterns that were starting to emerge. And so, because I'm an architect and a modeler by trade, I started to think of, how can I actually model this, right? How can I actually take what I'm doing and put it in the model so that it's easier to understand, but also easier to traverse through the different levels of abstraction, since not only was I dealing with people, I was also dealing with technology. I only have about 20 minutes, so I'm going to go through these slides pretty quickly. I'm going to focus on the sketching slides, and so if you want to see the presentation in its entirety, I recommend you come to Innovate, because at Innovate, I'll have more time and I'll be really happy to go through all the slides, but I don't want to give too much away, but I'm happy to take questions. So let's actually just set the stage real quick and talk about what modeling collaboration is. Collaboration, as everybody knows, is entities working together to achieve a shared goal. And that can happen in a variety of ways, as you see on the screen. That can happen anywhere from a couple of people to even a couple of organizations. And so it was important for me to kind of look through that and to see what I could do with a tool like RSA. There are various ways that collaboration provides value. I'm not going to go through this slide today, but I will go through it at Innovate. The key things here are, really around creativity. And one of the key tenets here is implementing enablement. I actually worked a lot with Darrell Rader from IBM on implementing enablement, and he was the person that kind of put the seed in my mind that helped all this stuff grow. So there are various ways that collaboration provides value. I'm going to move off of that to really kind of focus on those patterns that I mentioned before and talk a little bit about what are models of collaboration. As we start growing collaboration spaces, as I mentioned before, there are commonalities that we see. And so as I work through that, what I realize is that they were models just like anything else, any of the other code that I would be working with. And so I decided to explore that a little bit and really kind of define what I called a collaborative model. I shouldn't say, it's not a new term, it's just one that I use, which really focuses around reusable framework, allowing for collaboration, and having the ability to scale. Modeling is important in everything, just like it is in coding. It's also important in collaboration. It lets you test, it lets you validate. There are certain things it doesn't solve, but for the purposes of understanding and building, it does help you with that. It's important to focus a little bit before we start talking about sketching as to what's the difference from other types of collaboration modeling. I see there's a lot of people on the line. I'm sure there's a lot of UML experts here. So collaboration isn't new, right? It isn't a new concept. However, a lot of how it's represented in UML is in composite structure diagrams or in sequence interaction diagrams. But the real focus that I wanted to do, the real quote-unquote innovation, is to try to show how we could collaborate with each other through modeling. We already know why we're here to use RSA. RSA 8 has sketching. It's the tool, the feature that I really wanted to use to help me vet this concept out, and Roger's talked about that. But one of the things I decided to do is kind of take a stab at defining what I called collaborative models. And they mostly center around technology, but I decided that there were 5 collaborative models, and I'll go through what each of those are in the context of sketching. And what I wanted to do is to create a couple of exemplars or stereotypes, if you will, to help me realize that as I started my sketching. So one of the things here is that you see in RSA 8, I actually created with those exemplars some what I call collaborative models, so that they're simple models, that they're intermediate models, and that they're complex models. Each of those, of course, building off of the other. Let's talk a little bit about the stereotypes that I created to do this. Of course, an actor, that's what we call a user of the collaboration. So anybody who wishes to collaborate, we call an actor. I use the term vector to represent a method of collaboration, because there are different ways that you can collaborate. A lot of people, like we're doing right now, we're collaborating via the internet. We're using the IBM Smart Cloud meeting feature, and we're having this meeting, but there are also other ways to collaborate. You can collaborate through personal interaction, you can collaborate through phone calls, etc. There are also 2 other things I wanted to represent via sketching. One is actually what I call an element, which is just a collaborative element. It's essentially a model. So, for example, for purposes of this discussion, I used it to represent a meeting or a blog or a wiki or, an IM or anything that represents what you would call a collaborative element. And then finally, what I wanted to do was to discuss how collaborative elements work together. So I term that as an interaction. Interactions are generally composed of elements, and they represent different complexity levels. Some interactions are very simple. They'll have one element. Some interactions have, completely complex elements inside of them. So, for example, a conference could be looked at as an interaction. A user group could be looked at as an interaction, as well as a community of practice, which is how I started this whole thing in the first place. Let's talk a little bit about what I term as simple and intermediate collaborative models. As you can see on the screen, what I tried to do was to model myself as a WellPoint associate and to look at what are some of the ways that I would collaborate. So, for example, I would have a simple way to collaborate is I would have a meeting with somebody. So I could pick any one of you and have a meeting. Another way that I could collaborate is via a blog. So I could go to a blog on the internet, whether it be my company's intranet or just, Forbes.com or something like that, and actually interact with the blog. I could also, have more intermediate ways to collaborate. And as you can see, when we look at the intermediate element, there are a couple different ways to do that. So you could have, for example, an instant message, as well as training on demand. So if you can imagine some of the user groups that you go to on the internet, they have various ways various pieces of technology that you can use to collaborate within that user group, and I wanted to represent those. And finally, on the screen, we talk about a community of practice which is more complex, but let me kind of show you what I mean by that. So building off of the last model, what I did was I put together a quick sketch which showed both the simple things that I talked about before and the intermediate model that I talked about before, but I also wanted to represent a complex model. And so as you can see, at WellPoint, we use communities of practice, and communities of practice have different pieces of technology. So, for example, I've encapsulated a simple collaborative model, such as a wiki, a blog, or calendar, an intermediate one, such as a sub-site. We use SharePoint at WellPoint. So, for example, you could see there's a sub-site that captures a survey and or a forum, and also an instant messaging portal that would have video, a chat client, and a meeting client. All of those things would be represented in a complex collaborative model. But as you can see here from the sketch, it's easily encapsulated and much easier to understand how all of the pieces fit together. And really in sketching, the way I look at it and the way Roger's talked about it is that you really want to get a quick, you want to make sure that you understand how these pieces are put together, right? And that really comes into play, especially as things like this start to scale. So, for example, if I were to talk about, how do I build communities that interact with, communities or other things, such as another department's wiki or a knowledge base or a program dashboard, then I would start to look at things, for the purposes of this discussion in kind of a hub format. So as you can see on the screen, via the internet, a WellPoint associate may go to a feedback portal, and from there they may go to a community of practice to get their answer. And so then you can see, how do these things all interact with each other? And you may be wondering, in the community of practice, why is there, kind of a hub within a hub? Well, at WellPoint, we have communities of practice that focus on specific areas. We started with technology, but we now also have business communities of practice, but the same thing around collaboration and interaction still apply. From that feedback portal, you could go to a community of practice and you could traverse, through the architecture community, through the requirements community, back to the change community, and then from there, find a program dashboard. And that's a real thing that happens at, I'm sure at WellPoint and I'm sure at IBM and other companies, the ways that you traverse the internet and interact, they're all connected in some way. And it's really important to make sure that you understand that connection and see what it's related to. But there's a little bit more here, right? So at the very beginning of the slides I showed, there are different levels of models, right? So what happens, I showed, I started from a simple, collaboration model and went to a complex, went to a hub. But what happens as you start to collaborate across organizations or working on company-wide initiatives? And that's where I, started exploring, what does it mean to be, part of a collaboration cloud, right? So you're collaborating across organizations. So for example, if some of you are going to innovate, you may see that, there are different sites that you want to be a part of, and those lead to other sites, all of which are responsible for collaboration, right? So on this slide, what I like to do is talk a little bit about what we mean by that. How would you enable collaboration for a company-wide initiative or a consortium? Even though that infrastructure is outsourced, you still need to make sure that you can understand how all the pieces fit together and how the technology will enable you to collaborate further. So there's more here, right? Sketching really only gives you the tip of the iceberg. It really only is the starting point for this. And you want to make sure that you're able to explore the different levels of realization. Just like, for example, if you were working on a software model, you would start out, with use cases. You go to use case realizations. You do some domain modeling. You would go to class modeling. The concept is very similar. And so you need to make sure that you also realize the model after you sketch it out. And, you start out with that think speed that Roger talked about, or that person speed in terms of communities of practice. But in a very real sense at WellPoint, we then had to understand how we were actually going to get to realize the technology. So as you can see on this slide here, this really talks about, going through those different levels of abstraction, starting from a sketch. Well, okay, what are the components that are realized from that sketch? And then from there, what specific, topology models would you create? And then from there, what technology deployments would you have to do in order to realize your sketch? So if I wanted a intermediate collaboration model, how would that technology at the other end look like? How would it be put together? How would it be connected so that you could then have that collaboration you're looking for, right? So, I will say that this isn't, the end-all, be-all, but this was really designed to look at what sort of problem could we solve at WellPoint in order to do that. So let's explore that a little bit. Like I said, I'm not going to get too much into it, but I will definitely get into it more at Innovate if you guys are going to be there. But I talked before about realizing the collaborative model through the different levels of abstraction. So if you're a fan of Calvin and Hobbes like I am, I term it a little more like transmogrification, right? Because that's really what sketching and the transformation from sketching lets you do. It lets you turn it into what you'd like it to be. So in terms of this collaborative model, what I've actually been able to do is turn that into a deployment topology. So all the quote-unquote stereotypes that I use actually are realized to specific things within that deployment topology. So, for example, an actor becomes a system actor, an element becomes a component, an interaction becomes a configuration unit. Like I said, these aren't perfect, but these were ways to really kind of cement what I was looking for in terms of the deployment topology. So this is just a view on a simple collaborative realization, and I wanted everybody to take a quick look at that so you could see kind of, what are the next steps. And I'll definitely get into this more at Innovate. I'm not going to give too much of it away. But as you can see from here, I now have a deployment topology which I could use depending on the technology that I wanted to implement. You can see how the actor goes to the component I mentioned, how it goes to the configuration unit that has components within it, and from there I will continue to build that out to actually, this is how the technology will look, here at WellPoint. This is, for example, I mentioned that we use SharePoint. This is how, we would configure the SharePoint site or put it together so it has everything that we need. Or let's say, for example, we need to have a couple of other pieces of technology coupled with that. This would help us to realize what that would look like, what are the dependencies, and how would we, set that up. Also, the cool thing to note here is that it also, links back to that sketch. So if you look on the upper right-hand side, it links back to that sketch. So I have that traceability that I need from the think speed to the actual running systems. And that was, in order to solve the problem, that was very, very important. So with that said, I probably know I finished up a little bit early, but Roger, we got a couple minutes for questions. I would
absolutely, yeah.
I would definitely say that if folks want more information, I'll definitely go more into this at detail at Innovate, and kind of went through this pretty fast, but happy to take a couple questions and if I need to, defer some till then.
Yeah, and while you're, since I think you got on before me, Rusty, hit star 71 again, and that will open up the lines for question and answer.
All participants are now in interactive talk mode.
And if we do get a lot of background noise, I'll give you another code. But basically, the lines are open. There were some comments. Bob Schloss mentioned a few very interesting things that you can find in your chat. One question was, are these actual objects in my workspace? Can I share them through things like RTC source control? And part of my comment was there that there are some ways to publish these designs through something we call Design Manager, and there's a link for the YouTube video that shows exactly that in that chat. So, but I'll be quiet now and let's open it up for questions for Bob or anyone else.
I was going to say, Roger, if you want, I can, talk to some of the points in the chat session. Let me see if somebody else asked a question real quick.
Yeah, Joel actually, Joel, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit more about how you use it in the context of meetings, but I've done a similar thing in working with Daryl to kind of map out some of the communities that we're working with, and just quickly capture those ideas out.
Right, and I would say, that's really what I was really excited to use sketching about. What I've talked to people here and in other places about it is that, a lot of these concepts, aren't, they're not new. We're not reinventing how to bake bread, but what we're doing is taking something that allows us to get our thoughts down quickly, and then from there turn it into something that we can use as a model. And I've also found that it really helps in achieving understanding, right? So you can take these elements and you can, they're model elements. You can take them, you can put them into other models. You can have the hybrid model that you mentioned. You can very easily show the traceability in the progression from the abstract to the specific. And in a way that you were able to form those ideas in your mind, as opposed to kind of using a use case diagram and trying to tweak it to make it what you need to do. So I'm sure a bunch of us have used class diagrams and tried to model all sorts of different things, and it didn't quite work.
That's exactly right.
Sketching. I found that sketching worked. It worked, and then I was able to take that and turn it into a class diagram, which made me very, very happy.
Right. Yeah, this is Joel. I'll kind of also comment that when I've used it in front of customers, it really got people, engaged in that, when you use class diagrams or you've used other UML constructs, only the kind of techie people in the room would get engaged. But when you're just, dragging this box over there and typing in as somebody's talking, people didn't get scared that they didn't know UML. This is just like standing at a whiteboard, and it kept the thoughts going, and so we could, and I was, maybe just a scribe at some point, and so that facilitating of the collaboration was important. Then if I took that diagram and refactored a few of the components, maybe on a break to classes or deployment objects, then people would come back and they'd say, oh, okay, I understand what you did there. So it lowered the scare factor of UML for a lot of the non-technical folks.
Right, and I would agree with that. I mean, I know we certainly saw that here as well. And I've been able to take this and put this in front of anybody, and everybody's like, I get it, as opposed to, so how would you do that in SharePoint? Like, look here. Oh, okay, I get it now. Look here. And they understand. They make the connection very, very quickly.
Well, excellent. Thank you, Joel. Any other questions or comments?
All right, Roger. I know.
Well, excellent.
Over to you.
Yeah, we are, and we appreciate everyone who attended today and joining for this brief half-hour lunch and learn session. We do have other upcoming topics as shown on the screen. We just closed out the Java Refactoring and Designing for Testability series, which was led by Ken Britton. But we do have some future topics. If you visit the Good Design is Good Business site on DeveloperWorks, join that blog, follow that blog, you'll see some of the other topics that are coming up in there as well. With that, thank you, Rusty, and Joel, and Bob, and the rest of the 40 other people that were on the call. Appreciate it. Have a great day.
Thanks, guys.